Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining today. I'm your moderator, Anna Pettygen, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Programs at Government Executive. And I'd like to welcome you to today's webcast, Transforming the Acquisition Framework. Across the public sector, organizations are attempting to streamline their acquisition process by taking advantage of the consistency and auditability that information technology has to offer. By modernizing their framework, defense agencies can reduce the time between decisions and put the right technology in the hands of warfighters faster. However, as technology and missions change in real time, defense agencies are seeking innovative acquisition and procurement methods to remain adaptable in the competitive landscape. Begging to question, what are the current best practices and the future trends in acquisition modernization? And what support is available to agencies to transform their acquisition and procurement operations? For our conversation today, I'm excited to be joined by the Defense Innovation Unit's Director of Strategic Engagement, Mike Madsen, Senior Advisor of Agile Acquisitions for the DoD's Undersecretary of Defense of Acquisition and Sustainment, Tori Cuff, and Pega's Senior Director and Industry Principal for Defense, Cindy Stubner. Today, we're going to be discussing the effective practices currently being implemented, the innovative plans for the future, as well as lessons learned surrounding acquisition modernization. So before we really jump in, I want to give a few housekeeping items so everyone's good to go for the rest of the hour. First, thank you so much to Pega for sponsoring today's important conversation. Without their support, we wouldn't be here, so thank you so much to our partners over at Pega. We encourage you to check out our event resource center located in the right side of your screen. And throughout today's event, please feel free to share your own questions via our interactive Q&A. We hope you'll contribute to the conversation about how to tackle some of the government's most complicated problems. With that, I'd love to go ahead and get today's conversation started because we have a lot to discuss. So to kick off, I'll have each of our speakers kind of tell us a bit about themselves and also describe their role within their organization. So Mike, how about we get started with you?
Great. Thanks, Anna. Thanks for having me here. I look forward to this conversation. Very important topic, and you mentioned something in the intro that really resonated with me, and that's the whole reason that DIU was started, and that was to put technology in the hands of the warfighter on speeds that equal commercial cycles. So very excited about that. As you mentioned, I'm the Director of Strategic Engagement at the Defense Innovation Unit. DIU is a DoD entity. We are a government organization, started about 6 years ago as a way to lower barriers to entry to the defense marketplace for the non-traditional companies, those working in the leading edge of technology. As a Director of Strategic Engagement, I lead two internal organizations, our Defense Engagement Team and our Commercial Engagement Team. Our Defense Engagement Team works with our defense partners to curate their challenges, to find out what problems they need solved and see if there's a commercial solution for that. And they curate their requirements of those problems down to a simply stated problem statement to simplify the process from the defense side. And our commercial engagement team is engaged in the commercial tech ecosystem to see where the leading investments are taking place, what the leading edge technology is, and if those technologies, through minor customization, proving through prototyping, would be good candidates to solve DoD problems. Before that, I was the executive director of the 809 Congressional Advisory Panel for Acquisition Reform. So it was a smooth transition into streamlining the acquisition to get that technology to the men and women in uniform.
Great. Tori, I'll pass it to you.
Thanks, Anna, and I will echo Mike's comments of thank you all for having me here today. Very excited also to continue the discussion on this topic. And being here with Mike is also great. So I previously supported the Air Force before the joining the Undersecretary of Defense with acquisition and sustainment, and DIU was actually pivotal to the program that I prior worked, Kessel Run, to getting kickstarted and leveraging modern software platforms and really rethinking how to approach not only the program and the technology development, but our contracting and acquisition strategies. So I am very excited to be joining him in the discussion today. I have been with ANS since September 2019. The previous Undersecretary for Defense for ANS, Ms. Ellen Lord, asked me to join the team to help scale and promulgate the practices of agile and modern software across the defense acquisition system. Um, Prior to that, as I mentioned, I was supporting Kessel Run, so I have firsthand experience of understanding it is possible for programs to leverage modern software, commercial technologies, and agile and DevSecOps, not only in their engineering, but their program, contracting, and financial strategies. I am an acquisition person through and through, not an engineer. Don't ask me to code Java. I like to navigate the federal acquisition regulation, the FAR, DoD policy for acquisitions, and the financial management regulation to see how they can enable engineering and technology to be quickly integrated and adopted, again, as echoed by Mike and the intro, at the pace that technology and our users demand. Just to build upon as far as the efforts, and that I'll talk about a little bit more throughout the discussion, I am leading up some pilots associated with software acquisition training and overall software acquisition workforce. It is one of my favorite activities because I think our workforce is pivotal to scale, and we need to give them the tools. And the second thing I am the lead for is the single appropriation pilot for software and digital technology. So we'll talk a lot about acquisition reform, but I will definitely touch on the other reform activities that the department is embarking upon of ensuring all of our processes are truly enablers for programs writ large. So excited to continue the conversation, and back to you, Anna.
Great, thank you. And then Cindy, do you mind giving us a quick overview of yourself and your role?
No, thank you very much, Anna. And thanks for being here and for sponsoring this discussion with our folks in the government. We're always excited to have this kind of industry and government dialogue, so I'm very excited. I'm an industry principal at Pega Systems, and I focus on identifying ways that Pega can help defense customers improve their business and their mission operations with our low-code intelligent automation platform. And one of the most significant improvements I've seen at my time at Pega has been when organizations use our platform to insert and enable automation within the acquisition and procurement processes. So I've worked with government agencies for quite a long time, and I am somewhat familiar on the industry side with the elements of acquisition in government. That, you know, the method by which the agencies identify, acquire, and deploy systems and technology to help them succeed. And I can't begin to describe to you, as you all know, obviously, how complicated that is. And if you come from the commercial world, which I do, it looks very onerous. But it's also a process that I believe can be made more efficient and effective by inserting technology into the process itself. And we've been helping defense customers apply that technology to their acquisition processes for several years. And this is enabling them better information sharing and also making better efficiency gains. So I look forward to the panel discussion to hear from experts about other ways we can help.
Great, thank you so much. So as you all can see, we have an expert group of panelists today and lots to discuss. So excited to dive right into this conversation. So Tori, let's start with you. When it comes to modernizing your acquisition framework, what specific type of mission objectives do agencies seek to address? If you don't mind kicking off, Tori, and then we can hear from the others as well.
I think in general, one of the biggest objectives is how to change our acquisition process. And there's been multiple studies that have hit on this point that typically is measured in decades and condense it down to years or months. We want to really ensure that we are providing capability, emerging technology to the warfighter and across our business systems at the speed of relevance. So I think that is this overall objective we are trying to hit with digital modernization, a focus on software, and really looking forward to emerging technology to include AI and digital engineering. as far as what we are trying to put in place for building blocks, since joining ANS, I've been happy to be a part of the transformation of one of the most guiding DoD policies for acquisition, which is the rollout of the adaptive acquisition framework. So previously, the approach was a tailor out. It was a overarching document to guide programs, but it did not, even though it highly encouraged tailoring, we were seeing and getting feedback from the workforce that tailoring was often not occurring. So the AAF that was fully became available to the workforce in October of 2020 is moving away from the tailor out to a tailor in. There are 6 pathways that are introduced that can be used by themselves or in tandem that is really trying to drive at the unique systems that we know exist in the work or in the department. And so the newest one being a software acquisition pathway coupled with the middle tier acquisition are both really there that we added to really incorporate the concepts of modern software development. Middle tier is getting at prototyping, both in development and in operations in a much shorter time span than typically we were seeing in the past of less than 5 years. And then the software pathway really takes that another step further and is requiring programs within a year to have capability being delivered and iterated upon to the field. So I think one of the things we've been trying to do within ANS is to make sure our policies are enablers and are not the reasons that programs are feeling hindered as far as keeping up not only with commercial technology, but really aligning our practices. So we're an attractive partner to industry, to small businesses, and we are really growing the defense industrial base so that the department and federal agencies are remaining competitive and relative in this environment. I think the other real goal is this idea of when can we streamline and when can we delegate. So understanding that the chain and review cycle time have been notably a issue in the past. That is one of the real goals and one of the things we're trying to encourage. We're really trying to flip the pyramid, at least within ANS, of not only is our policy an enabler, but we want to be an enabler and a resource to the workforce because we don't review as many programs. Most of them have been delegated down, but that doesn't mean that we cannot help in navigating larger policies and processes and being an advocate and a voice for the programs. And I'll turn it over to Mike to make some adds from his DIU perspective.
I appreciate that, Tori. Thanks. And I couldn't agree more with everything you said there. And, you know, a couple things really resonated where we measure acquisition in decades. We need to get it down to really months. And from our perspective, that's matching the commercial cycles. You also talked about the adaptive acquisition framework, which is a great giant step forward. But to add a little context to that, you know, looking back 50 years, when the DoD procurement system was created about 50 years ago, DoD was leading in the technologies that it needed, which was primarily microelectronics, and that's really a first mover strategy. And today, that's only true for only 2 of the 10 modernization priorities: hypersonics and directed energy. 8 of the 10 modernization priorities, the advancements are really being taken place in the commercial sector. And in fact, the commercial sector outspend the government by about 3 to 4 times in R&D, and that gap is increasing. Currently, it's about $250 billion per year now. And we need to be able to find ways to leverage that, getting down to those commercial cycles that you mentioned. And that's really why DIU was created, to leverage that large amount of capital investment that was taking place in the commercial sector and illuminate a path to the defense marketplace. You talked about policies as enablers instead of as barriers. And I couldn't agree more. We need to find ways to lower those barriers to entry to the defense marketplace. And that's part of the DIU mission, is to accelerate the commercial technology, transform the capability and capacity by scaling that technology, and then strengthen the national security innovation base, which we see as the evolution of the triangle of academia, industry, and government that birthed Silicon Valley decades ago. But DIU's acquisition framework, again, seeks to lower those barriers to entry, some of them policy-related that you mentioned, Tori, and look more like a commercial entity to other commercial companies. So some of the elements of our strategy and framework is to maximize competition. We developed a commercial solutions opening that we'll talk about a little bit later. Reduce cost for the vendors, as well as simplify the process, increase speed and transparency, and minimize the opportunity cost for vendors, because there's a cost for them for every proposal they submit that they are not selected on. And so again, getting back to decreasing the time from decades to years or months while still maintaining that transparency and that competition for the best value to the taxpayer while getting the best technology in the hands of the men and women in uniform. And so we see these objectives as a focus largely because they represent those barriers to entry and have caused many leading edge tech companies to not even consider DoD as a viable customer.
Great. And that was a really comprehensive overview. And curious, Cindy, if you have seen any other objectives from your defense counterparts or anything else you'd provide from the industry perspective there.
Sure. I think we were really excited to see the adaptive acquisition framework roll out, not only because the intent is really to expedite the process and reduce the time it takes from idea to delivery, which everyone is aware is slower than they would like it to be, but also slower than it needs to be. But the other component of what both the other guests are talking about really has to do with enabling the best decisions so that you buy what you need when you need it, but also that you buy it in a manner that works well for you. And more importantly, you buy it as quickly as possible. And if you need to pivot because where you're going or where you're headed isn't exactly what you're looking for, that you can pivot quickly. And all of those elements are really are ripe for, in terms of decision making, are ripe for inserting technology to enable that decision making to become more rapid, to become more iterative, right? And also to become more familiar to commercial entities who have adopted agile frameworks in their technology environments and their R&D environments for quite some time. So I think there's a way to leverage that technology, not only to make things quicker, but to enable better decisions and also to drive more of a synergy between commercial best practices, commercial environments where agile framework is the way it is, and that's all it is, to the Department of Defense, where they become more agile when they're buying items and they're procuring their technology for the next wave for the warfighter. So I think there's plenty of opportunity out there, but it's very exciting for us to see how you can weave those two together to merge the entities better so that they're achieving the same end result.
Great. And I know we touched on this already, but as government leaders, Tori and Mike, I'd love to hear from you on how you champion reskilling your workforce to adapt to more of these cloud and open source technologies. Mike, let's start with you.
Yeah, thanks, Tori. The acquisition workforce, the culture, I think those two items will be themes that will be sprinkled throughout. As we just talked about, the changing acquisition framework and the fact that the changes that Tori mentioned are really recent changes in a 50-year program, essentially. You could think of it that way. So there are going to be a learning curve for sure. But we wouldn't be able to do this new acquisition framework without the right workforce to be able to support that new way of thinking. And for us, for DIU, we're fortunate, but we're unique. We have about 65 permanent folks that work for DIU, and it's a combination of government civilians, military, activated reservists, in various capacities. But we also are able to leverage commercial execs in the technology ecosystem that are at the right point in their career that they're able to come back to or start government service for the first time. We also leverage reservists who have spent time in the private sector, whether it's with startups or established companies like Google, Apple, Facebook, but yet on the cutting edge of that technology development. And what that allows us to do is it allows us to take those reservists who have experience with the military mindset as well as the tech ecosystem and translate Defense Department operational needs to commercial companies, and then also to translate technology and commercial capabilities, cycles, speeds, et cetera, to the Defense Department to kind of break through some of those cultural issues that we have to work through. We're also excited about a new effort that we have. We're prototyping this effort. It's called Gig Eagle. It was authorized last year in the National Defense Authorization Act and appropriated as well. So Congress has an interest in this as well. And you can think about it as Uber for reservists, or kind of an on-demand function where DoD entities can put what they want. You know, they might need a reservist that can code in Python. And there might be a reservist that works somewhere that happens to code in Python, and they were able to link up that way. Whereas a reservist is not doing, you know, something that would be more traditional. It's an opportunity to really leverage some of those things. And we also have a sub-organization called National Security Innovation Network. It's a network of universities across the country. One of their marquee products is a course called Hacking for Defense that, with a DoD sponsor, takes DoD problems to a master's level course, and through the course of a semester, they come up with a min-viable product. In fact, we've had a couple of outputs from that. A small sat company started as a hacking for defense problem, and now it is a multi-million-dollar company that we're continuing to prototype small sat for overhead imagery with them. But what it also does is it illuminates a path back to government service for a lot of those folks that are already working on DoD problems. But you're right, and this is such an important issue with the culture and the workforce, so we have to continue to evolve that as we try to modernize and transform the capabilities of the department.
Great. And Tori, any follow-ups there?
Yes, definitely want to build on what Mike was saying. And I think it's important to realize that these ideas and these concepts, although have been inherent in industry for a while, we really are taking strides and steps to make them foundational in the department. And we are transitioning from a strategy that had been in place for a really long time. So we won't get to mass adoption and scale for digital transformation without our workforce. I mean, technology is amazing. We're all using it not only in work, but our personal lives. But technology isn't the difference maker. Technology is not valuable unless you have a workforce that can leverage it, an organization that can procure it, and someone that can continually ensure that it's secure and meeting our overall defense requirements and integrated. So I'm a big proponent of making sure we have a skilled workforce, but it's more than just making sure we have technical talent in software engineering and software coders. We need that. We need cloud architects, data scientists. We need all of those skill sets, but we need our whole workforce to have, in my opinion, an understanding of digital foundations to the same extent that we are comfortable with Microsoft, Excel, and Word. Procuring cloud technologies, being responsive to changing tech, that needs to be understood from a program manager to a contracting officer so that they can use all the tools in their tool belt to be able to write contracts to provide the guidance to vendors so that it is executable and it's really meeting the demand of our users. So I think we are in a critical process of we are providing a lot of tools. We are updating policy. We are providing guidance of expectations of DoD really adopting DevSecOps, but we need to make sure our workforce can hit the ground running. That's why one of my favorite efforts that I'm working is not only workforce training, but career planning for this digital acquisition. So one of the efforts that I've been working with a wonderful team on is how do we provide that multidisciplinary foundational training that is responding to the changing concepts and really relating why and how agile can be applied not only to your engineering approach, but all the way to your contracting strategy. So I've been working on that since October 20. The pilot is still in pilot phase, and we tested that out with a slew of members across the workforce, across multiple functionals. We are actually in a partnership with the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center to expand it from software to AI. So we really are in the thick of how do we not only set clear expectations from a leadership example of the importance and the emphasis on transformation and emerging technology, but giving our workforce the tools. The Defense Innovation Board said it best: software is made by people and for people. So digital talent matters, especially your internal talent. I would love that we are on par and competitive with industry, and the department is in that flux with insert startup here, Google, Amazon, Microsoft. We are in that cycle of getting employees. And the only way I think we get there is if we really take a targeted emphasis on our workforce, which I'm really happy to see we're seeing all the way coming from SecDef. So I think we are right in the thick of this investment, and we're really hoping to send a strong signal that this is something we desire, and also want to partner with the DIB, because our workforce is, yes, civilian, military, reservist, as Mike was outlining, but almost every single one of our programs, we rely on the defense industrial base to augment our team. So we want it to be very clear that and help with their recruiting and make sure that federal work is on the top of future graduates and future employees' minds.
Great. And as Mike mentioned, I think the workforce and just reskilling and retaining that talent will continue to permeate throughout this conversation. So it's just so important to the overall missions that you all outlined already. So to kind of shift to the next question here, how does your acquisition modernization strategy integrate with your existing digital transformation journey? So how can you take advantage of some of the assets that have already been developed while simultaneously taking advantage of new open technologies? Tori, do you want to kick off that one?
Sure. So I think not to beat the dead horse, but the adaptive acquisition framework is the foundation. So that's your overall strategy and vision of how you're going to acquire your system. There is additional regulation that is an important enabler and has actually predated the new AAF as far as guidance. And I'm going to talk about the federal acquisition regulation. So this is the FAR is what guides our contracting approaches and strategies. And long has the FAR pushed the department for a preference for acquisition of commercial items. So we should be looking to industry first, especially when we are talking about a lot of the initiatives we are and meeting the digital transformation we're desiring. The second point is a modular contracting strategy. Again, this is to ensure that what Cindy was talking about earlier, that the department can make trade-offs and be most responsive as technology is changing. Having multiple contracts ongoing and the ability to pivot the approach because a new technology comes out or a new company is established, the department wants to be attractive not only to the industrial base, but that's allowing us to be most responsive to the needs of the workforce and ultimately the end users. So I think Mike, and I won't steal his talking track, we'll talk about there are vehicles outside of the FAR. But I personally have seen that programs can use this. We use this at my time at Kessel Run, and they still are using the FAR to support their adoption and continual delivery of capability to the Air Operations Center. And the actual vision, again, really sets the tone of is to deliver on a timely basis the best product or service to the customer. I often talk about this in other speeches and talks because if you talk about the Agile Manifesto, they're just asking us to step it up one of not timely but continuous. And I think that is exactly where we're trying to go with our digital transformation. The other things I think that we want to make sure people are aware of, we are trying to provide guidance on intellectual property. We very much understand, again, commercial industry is leaning forward and is, as Mike said, really pushing the needle on a lot of our modernization initiatives. And we want to ensure that we are establishing those relationships that are most advantageous to both the department and the companies. And building upon that, the modular open system. So we really, throughout not only our acquisition, contracting, our data approaches, trying to incorporate these practices that are foundational to digital transformation. And really, again, it goes back to this theme of within A&S, we do provide policy as a groundwork, but making sure we are helping to get ahead and evaluate and help the workforce navigate that policy and leverage it to the maximum extent. So over to Mike on building up on that.
Yeah, thanks, Tori. A couple threads that I want to pick up on. One of them was from the workforce discussion on engaging the traditional defense industrial base. And I couldn't agree more. I mean, look, modernization of the department is going to take all players, whether it's the traditional defense industrial base, systems integrators, non-traditional companies, small tech startups. I mean, even the two gals in Location X that are generating the next generation of technology. So it's going to take all players. And the modular open system architecture that you described also, Tori, is going to be critical to that, to approach it so that all of those different players can come in, and there's kind of an open portal to plug in whatever the next iteration is as we try to match those commercial development cycles, which are 12 to 18 months, being able to do that without revamping the entire hardware platform. So that completely resonates with us, and we're excited to hear that. Also, you talked about the software workforce and acquisition. We're excited to see how this plays out, because this really could be, I mean, you could almost call it a prototype for another way ahead. You've heard color of money for software being batted around and some of those kind of things. So again, giving the freedom to more closely match the cycles of the commercial sector is very exciting to us. And again, coming back to our acquisition modernization strategy based on leveraging the commercial products, and with minor customization, proving through prototyping that can solve DoD problems. But we don't just prototype the technology, we also prototype the methodologies. And Cindy mentioned something that I want to pull into this discussion also. She talked about rapid decision making and being able to adjust rapidly. And that we found that prototyping is starting to get at some of those challenges, where you can, through prototyping, determine where changes need to be made and make those without going through back through a requirements process, to allow for some agility in our development. But through this prototyping of methodologies, in addition to technologies, we developed the competitive process called our commercial solutions opening. And this is a process that maximizes competition and minimizes company burdening, leveraging problem statements that I mentioned before from the DoD, and using non-consortia OT authority. Starting with that simply stated problem statement, half a page or a paragraph, and looking for a 5-page white paper, a 15-page slide deck in return. And then we look to award a prototype contract in 60 to 90 days. We're running a little bit slow right now, about 140 days, but it's still a giant advancement in some of the other processes. And then filling that technology in 1 to 2 years, whether it's hardware, software, with Alliance, Tori, with I think what you were talking about. And then finally, we look to leverage production OTs to provide commercial marketplace for department-wide solutions for those problems. So that's broadly, again, our little more detail on our modernization strategy. And then what we also like to do is while we are prototyping for our DoD partners, we also work to leverage some of the advancements taking place in the tech focus areas. For example, we are working on a prototype right now with the Army to leverage AI to help reconcile financial records. Now, arguably not the most glamorous use of AI, but a very effective use of AI and machine learning, which early indications are that it has a potential to save millions of dollars. So that's one example of how we're continuing with our acquisition strategy, but also being open to those emerging technologies that pop up as we move forward.
That's great. And Cindy, I'm curious if you have any follow-ups there from your perspective.
Yeah, I definitely do. It's funny. Some of what Mike was describing and some of what Tori was describing, really ties in with where a low-code software platform like what Pega offers sort of fits perfectly. And I don't want to sound too self-serving here, but the truth of the matter is that our software, low-code software, which has a really unique drag and drop level of interface to it, enables a business user to go ahead and try and model out what they're looking at automating, and then run that model and see if it works. So it's prototyping within prototyping almost. And the neat thing about capability like that, which is gaining a lot of traction across the department, is that you can truly try before you buy, but you can try before you try and then you buy. And the neat part about all of this is that we've seen a lot of folks within different commands and different organizations across the department take a look at what we're trying to accomplish, whether it's, what Mike mentioned about reconciling financial transactions, which you can leverage automation for tremendously. And we've actually demonstrated that, in the Army directly, in the not too distant past, about actually reconciling what was a manual process to identify and actually streamline the entire procurement and payment methodology. With software like what Pega offers, you can lay that around existing environments. And that also wraps around an existing investment in technology that the department has made over 20, 30, even 40 years, without disrupting that underlying technology, but modernizing it. You can actually identify where you need to tap into that existing environment, take that process a step further as you try to modernize it. As steps change, as regulations change, as requirements change, you can put those changes in a low-code software platform like Pega, moderate around your existing environment, and actually make that system operate a lot more efficiently and a lot more effectively without disrupting the underlying data. Because the last thing you want to do with all of this process while you're expediting everything is not introduce risk. I mean, most of the processes that the department has are intended to enable the warfighter, but they're also intended to make sure we don't add risk to our environment, because that doesn't get us where we need to be. It puts us backwards. So, one of the best benefits of this prototyping environment, the adaptive acquisition environment framework, is to get us to a point where we can move faster, but not add risk to the process while we're doing it. And I think that's what's so exciting for us, is that we see our technology fitting in all across these initiatives as an enabler, really, because that's what technology is. It is an enabler to achieve the mission, and that's what we're about at Pega.
That's great. So what are some of the biggest challenges that organizations are facing when modernizing legacy acquisition frameworks? Mike, let's start with you.
Okay, sounds good. Before I jump into that, I'm going to come back to Cindy. I love that try before you try. I'm going to steal that line. I will cite appropriately, Cindy, but I'm definitely going to lift that, just so you know.
All yours.
Because you hit on exactly the thing. Prototyping is so critical to not only allow for adjustment and rapid decision making, but really it is all about managing and mitigating risk. And you don't want to inject any risk that's already there, and in fact, you want to mitigate it. So I love that. And that kind of leads into some of the challenges is mitigating that risk aversion. We talked about the workforce, and I've said this before. I know many people have said this before, but DoD doesn't have an innovation problem, but it's an innovation adoption problem. And I think it's related to some of those new concepts that we've talked about. And many of them are related to getting, like I said, that buy-in from folks on this new way of doing business. One of those is OTs. Even though other transaction authority has been around for decades, there's still a level of discomfort with using those. And so that's one of the challenges. We want to get more comfort throughout the workforce with those and broaden the use of those beyond just research and engineering to mainstream acquisition. And not as the end all be all for rapid acquisition, but just to allow the workforce to have one more tool in their toolkit. Tori talked about the FAR. There are many things about the FAR that don't impede moving quickly. So to add to that toolkit, OTs more broadly, and ensure that that's available, and again, that the workforce is very comfortable using that. And understanding what other tools are out there, not just the policy piece, but knowing when the appropriate time to use those and how to use those tools. Again, all with the end goal of speed and the rapid decision making moving forward. We should also continue to work to increase the use of prototyping, as we talked about, the try before you try. I love that. That's a relatively new concept in the department, and we need to continue moving forward with that for rapid input and integration of real-time end users. A quick example of that, we were doing a prototype with the Army for drone capability, and we had 5 or 6 vendors, and we were able to get them on an Army range where they could put their product in the hands of the end user who was going to be using it. And most drone manufacturers were making drones, commercial drones for suburban families who were just using it for recreational uses. And when they saw the Army folks using these, recognizing that they were trying to actuate switches with their combat gloves on, actuate switches that were made for very commercial use in the backyard, and recognize that they needed to make those changes. So they were able to take that feedback that night, make those changes, come back the next day with new adjusted products to that situation, and continue to move it forward without going back through some long redefining exactly what they need process for that. So those are just some of the high-level challenges that we see. But again, I think a common thread is continuing to get the workforce very comfortable with this authorized acquisition tools in their toolbox.
Great. And I don't know, Tori, do you have any other challenges that you've seen or that you'd like to call out for the audience?
Yes, I think, and obviously echo the importance of workforce, and I'll double tap on that as Mike already has. But the other big challenge that we are seeing is majority of programs in the department are existing. That means they have an existing acquisition strategy, established contractual relationships, a fielded capability that's currently being used and must be maintained. And additionally, they are trying to modernize. So step one often is siphoning off a portion of your budget to begin incorporating these concepts. And as Mike said, it's not as easy as just setting aside money. The department has colors of money. So it's setting aside the appropriate color of money for the activities that you are trying to navigate and support. And I mean, I'll just real quickly touch on that is one of the reasons why we are piloting a single appropriation for software and digital technology to understand the benefits and potential drawbacks of if the department does decide to make a recommendation of utilizing a different approach for even funding these activities, not just what is our acquisition strategy, but what is our funding strategy. We're still in really early stages, so we just kicked off that pilot thanks to the support of Congress in FY 2021. So we are still learning and understanding how that's impacting programs today. But going back to this overall existing programs, it's a really important concept of setting expectation management. As much as the workforce and that we want to hit the ground running, there are steps that have to be taken first so that even starting their digital transformation is achievable. I like to often quote that Netflix, when they embarked upon their digital transformation, it took them 7 years. And so I'm hoping that we can learn from Netflix and other organizations, but the department is hundreds of Netflix again, as far as we have multiple systems that we are supporting and different users, different technology. So we have to navigate this in different contexts and run by different services. And that's an important side note that I try to really elevate. It's not that we're not moving. It's our starting point, unfortunately, is not here is a pot of money, let's go. Your starting point is, let's make sure you're not hurting the warfighter today, and you can begin modernizing and really adopting. We are seeing really positive things happening. So I want to caveat that. As I mentioned, a lot of programs have existing acquisition strategies that were approved with the rollout of the adaptive acquisition framework. We are seeing programs actively choose to switch and to go through that process of review that typically only occurs at the beginning of the program. So we are seeing early signs of some of the policy movements that we are making are seen as valuable to the workforce. But again, to Mike's point that we need to continue to spread awareness. There are so many tools available to programs from acquisition strategy to contracting strategy to pilots that we're continually trying to be responsive of and learn. And so we need to really always keep that awareness up and really work together to make sure, again, we're responding to the needs of individual programs. Programs deliver. Unfortunately, I don't work on a program anymore. I'm in policy and overall strategic. And we don't want to forget, and that's why I love working with programs on a day-to-day basis that I still get to, is because what we are doing and putting in place from our level in A&S and service leads and what Mike was saying with what DIU is trying to put in place is we should really be making sure we're constantly breaking down those challenges and making it easier for the next program as they try to adopt. So my biggest takeaway is or challenge is helping to defend programs and level set on expectation management of how the speed at which this will all occur. Always push us to be faster, but do recognize there is a process. It's a process for industry, and equally as much as we are pushing the needle or pushing the gas pedal, we do have some hurdles that we're trying to get over.
Hey, Anna, before we move on, I want to pick up a point that Tori mentioned, and that was the color of money piece of it. And a significant challenge that we see emerging as a lot of our prototypes mature into production and move on from there is the challenge with the significant efforts that we've seen around acquisition reform, but not the corresponding energy around budget reform. Tori and I have both spent a good bit of time working in the acquisition reform realm, and there hasn't been the corresponding budget reform. And what I mean by that is what we're seeing is if we have prototypes that are done ahead of schedule and off of the department budgeting cycle, that puts in a 12 to 18 month delay minimum. And by then, of course, the technology is stale. The workforce is part of it was bringing that technology. So that's one of the challenges I see. Now, on the positive side, there is increasing energy on the Hill around this, as well as in the building, that there needs to be some mechanisms to put in place, whether it's something like the software color of money that we mentioned before that gives a little more flexibility, or some sort of funding mechanism to help bridge some of those gaps into a program of record. But it is something that is going to increasingly be there as we try to match those the commercial cycles, recognizing that we're not a commercial entity. We will never take on the exact commercial cycles because we have to be good stewards of the taxpayer dollar, but increasing that transparency, the competition to get as close as we can to that.
Yeah, and just to build one more off of that, right? Acquisition is just one part of the process. And when we mean acquisition, we're talking about program and contracting strategy to deliver capability. As Mike is talking about, there's also the funding, which is the planning, programming, budgeting, execution cycle, which is a 2-year cycle time. And then there's the requirements process on the front end. So there is an active emphasis across the board of making sure all 3 cycles are enabling and being that responsive. I really enjoy being part of the single appropriation pilot. As Mike said, there's a lot of support from the Hill coming for other PPBE reform, and we're excited for what that means. But it is this constant relook of not just acquisition policy, but all underlining policies to make sure that they are as much of an enabler as they can be and are often reevaluated for potential to streamline. We want to really incorporate that idea of continuous learning, not only in the capabilities we deliver, but in the ways the department does business.
Great. I think that all super insightful, and I think resonates a lot with our audience. And I'm curious, Cindy, if you have anything to follow up on there, if there are other challenges that you've seen your customers facing, or things that Pega looks to address.
Yeah, I want to pull on or add a little bit to what both Tori and Mike said, because I do see quite a bit, from the industry perspective, and our government customers often express to us a concern, when looking at technology about, how much risk that's going to introduce, how much it's going to cost, right? These are basic concerns and questions that always come through, but really it also boils down to ensuring that there's a level of education of what is the art of the possible. And also that art of that possible, how difficult is that going to be? How much change is that going to introduce? Is this on a roadmap? Is this something that I can do in a measured way, right? So I think one of the things that's important is, as Tori mentioned, there's so many tools that acquisition environments are introducing and making available to their employees, but that takes there's a level of effort required there from an education standpoint, then a familiarization standpoint, getting comfortable with that technology, making sure it's not introducing additional risk. And I think at what we've seen with customers is helping them outline small changes, more or less along the lines of thinking big, thinking towards transformation, but starting small so that you get comfortable with what you're looking at and you can evolve over time. That is a level of agility that I think people sometimes don't consider. Moving too slowly, they think is not agile enough. And quite frankly, it's the exact opposite. It's the level of agility that you need to introduce to protect against risk, but at the same time move the organization forward. And we're seeing a lot of that in a lot of different areas across the department. But I also think as the department gets more comfortable with the education, that the users get more comfortable with what they're looking at, and then they demand to work with organizations who understand the acquisition process and the environment that they're working in, right? Because the department is very different. As Mike mentioned, they're never going to be a commercial entity, and that is not what is expected of them. But they need to work with vendors who understand how to migrate and automate large enterprise scale systems in that measured way, in that one journey at a time, and focus on the outcomes so that we get to start achieving the transformation that they're looking for without introducing risk, like I said.
Great. Thank you. So what should agencies do to ensure they're modernizing their acquisition framework securely while staying focused on the mission and using taxpayer dollars wisely? And what are those necessary first steps? Tori, do you want to take this one first?
Yep. So I think we've hit on this some already. I'm a big believer in how to break down the capability into smaller chunks. Not anything we haven't talked about. Prototypes is something we've been mentioning heavily. This is the foundational concept behind Agile and other methodologies in modern software development of how to start small and get user feedback to inform the approach. The faster the department can better understand if a capability is meeting the need and to pivot, the better off we are going to be. that's the goal behind a lot of these reforms, from middle tier to the software acquisition pathway, to other initiatives that we're embarking upon, is can we quickly understand if the way we are trying to solve the problem is actually what the user needs. That environment continues to change, both from a technology and adversarial standpoint. So we are constantly learning and need to provide more and more programs with that opportunity of the user feedback, because without having that, and I think DIU, I'll say, really exposed that when I first was starting on incorporating these concepts of it. Otherwise, we're just throwing darts in the wind. We don't know if we cannot actively engage, meet with them, and watch them use the technology or watch their current workflow to be able to best improve it. As far as securely, if you look at the adaptive acquisition framework, which is easily Googleable, and there's graphics, cybersecurity is on the left side. It is something that should be thought of from the beginning of a program and throughout. It is a never-ending component. Security, as we are seeing more and more, both in the department and in the industrial space, is top of mind of how to ensure not only you're delivering capability, but you are doing so securely. Speed is a big factor of that. We understand that threat landscape changes, and our ability to be most responsive is a critical enabler and a deterrent. So that, again, goes back to why prototyping, by continuously delivering, being able to prove that you can respond, is absolutely foundational to this transformation and the capabilities. The other thing is, again, the feedback loops to make sure all of these initiatives we're embarking upon is providing the results and the intent. Like I've mentioned, our goal is to streamline, to allow the opportunity for tailoring, and to really create that opportunity to be most responsive to warfighter needs. So we need to continuously evaluate our policy, make sure value is being delivered to individual missions and capabilities. This isn't a one-time fielding process. It is a continual process from program development to process development. And I think that really all combined allows us to make sure, again, we're being honest stewards of the taxpayer dollars. If a failed prototype is not what we need, we quickly pivot. So with that, I will transition to Mike.
Thanks, Tori. So yeah, a lot to unpack there, but I think it's a lot of the things we've talked about. I think the first, as far as necessary first steps, I think the first things we've talked about here is to fully understand what are the tools in the toolbox and what's the right tool for that situation, whether it's the urgent need path or the middle tier path, or a CSO with an OT via DIU, whether it's that path. Use of commercial technology whenever possible is mandated by Congress, but we're not set up to optimize that. And so what we need to do to save money, to leverage that R&D investment that's taken place in the commercial sector, is shift to be optimized to leverage those when we can. And I think, how can agencies focus on modernizing while also staying focused on or mitigating risk where necessary, and using taxpayer dollars wisely? I think there it's first and foremost to fully understand where and what the risks are, especially as we start leveraging commercial technology and help transition that into using DoD to solve some of those problems. And then the other way to use taxpayer dollars wisely, in addition to leveraging the R&D that's taken place in the commercial sector, is to start looking across not only the department, but the executive branch, to see if there are any other prototypes and solutions out there that can be leveraged to solve the specific agency's problem. We had a prototype project we started, we call Blue UAS, and we recognized that there's not a domestic producer in the drone marketplace. taken up by a foreign producer of drone capability. And it started as an Army challenge. And as we went through that prototyping process, we recognized the value of making that available across the department and across the executive branch. In fact, it's on the GSA schedule now to purchase drones. When we saw that the mission set for the Army was very similar to what other services needed, but also more than that, what Customs and Border Patrol might need in DHS, State Department, FAA, there are requirements that could be met by this. And so what we did is we were leveraging the entire economic buying power of the executive branch to not only satisfy a need, but also to build a domestic capability that was cyber secure. So I think it's looking at other solutions out there and seeing what can be leveraged for agency problems to solve.
Great. Thanks. That's a really helpful use case. And then Cindy, do you have any follow-up there?
I mean, I pretty much would largely echo, even in industry, what both Tori and Mike were talking about in terms of the agility and testing things out to make sure that the security is there in addition to, meeting all of the specific requirements that the government has. I think, again, if you're working with vendors who do understand what your needs and your mission are, I think that goes a long way. And the department has been doing this with CMMC and some other recent initiatives with regard to making sure that cybersecurity is top of mind. There's no organization out there that doesn't, that doesn't recognize that it needs to be top of mind. There's all kinds of issues we all have out there, and I know that the Department of Defense is a very big target, right? So working with those vendors who can understand how to test that security in the prototyping process to ensure that it's there, it's incorporated, and it's part of the thought through DevSecOps, I think is critical. So, we see that at Pega all the time, and, we are on board with those changes that the department is moving forward with. And, we focus on cybersecurity every day.
Great. Well, we are actually out of time. This has been an amazing conversation. We could probably keep talking for a few more hours here, but we need to wrap up today. So Mike, Tori, and Cindy, thank you all for this great discussion. So informative. And also thank you to our audience for tuning in to this program, Transforming the Acquisition Framework. If you missed part of today's show or want to share it with any of your colleagues, the on-demand program will be available shortly, and we'll be sharing it via email. From GovExec, I'm Anna Pettyjohn, and we'll see you again soon.